Are we ready? Not yet? Are you ready? Good morning, everyone. Good morning. How are you? It's so good to see so many people in the room. I know you have been having some great times here at CBC, and it's just so good to see everyone up. So thank you all for coming. Again, my name is Kim Winston. I'm Director of State and Local Government Affairs for Starbucks Coffee Company, and we are pleased to be here supporting the 51st annual gathering of CBCF. So thank you all for what you do. I just wanted to, first of all, say thank you to Congresswoman Sewell and Congressman Butterfield. Thank you so much for hosting us. We really appreciate it. And thank you for your leadership. I'm also happy to bring greetings on behalf of Starbucks, but I would be remiss if I didn't introduce my leader, who is sitting here in the front, AJ Jones, Executive Vice President of Global Public Affairs. So, AJ. And also, I want to acknowledge my colleagues who are helping me conduct this coffee tasting. And just so you know, Starbucks has a ritual whenever we meet. No matter what the meeting is, we always start with a coffee tasting. And so before the coffee gets cold, I just want to walk you through those steps. Today we are tasting one of our heritage blends, Pike Place. And Pike Place is really what got us started. We're the same age as CBCF in terms of we're 51 years old. And so, but Pike Place was the coffee where we got our start. And it really represents the heritage and our commitment to excellence. So we're going to start with a coffee tasting. So everyone has a cup, I hope. Okay. And so the first thing you do with a coffee tasting, and we do a lot of this, is you cup it. So you have to put your hand over it so you can smell the aroma. So you start with that. I won't ask you what you're smelling. Most people say I'm smelling coffee, and that's okay. But we have kind of this sommelier romance with coffee. So it might feel caramely or it might taste soft on your tongue. But anyway, the point being that coffee is individual. And so wherever it hits your taste buds, that's what we really want to grab. So then the second part of this is after you cup and smell, then you slurp. So you go, yeah, you cold slurp it, and it's nothing rude about slurping hard. We do a lot of this. But anyway, it's really to spread and the flavors of the coffee across your palate. So anyway, if you do it at home, grab your green apron. We have plenty. Or come into one of our stores, and we'd be happy to conduct a coffee tasting with you. But anyway, I want to move on and just talk a little bit about Starbucks. As I mentioned, for 51 years, we have been engaged in supporting civic engagement. It's absolutely vital. So today's conversation is so important to us, not only as a company or brand, but to our partners, our employees, which there are over 300,000 plus partners. And so we really pride ourselves in making sure that we are engaged as well as our partners are engaged in civic engagement. And so it's really, so this morning, I just wanted to tell you a little bit about the work that we're doing to expand civic engagement. We have developed a relationship with several organizations, many who are here today, LCCHR, NAACP, and also the Lawyers Committee. And so we are working through many, many groups and providing access, easy access for our partners, as we call them, our employees, to actually encourage and engage in civic engagement and voting rights here in your communities. And so to that end, I just wanted to say that, we stand with you, that we will continue to support many of the organizations that you hold dear. We look forward to this conversation today. We thank you again, Congresswoman Sewell and Congressman Butterfield, for your leadership, and know that Starbucks stands with you in this journey, and it is a journey. So thank you all for your time. We appreciate it, and I'll turn it over to you. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. I want to thank our sponsors, Starbucks, Lyft, and the League of Women Voters for sponsoring today's session. They deserve a round of applause. Thank you so much. I have two hats today. I'm Congresswoman Terry Sewell. I proudly represent Alabama's 7th Congressional District. It includes, they're in the House. It includes the historic cities of Birmingham, Montgomery, and my hometown of Selma, Alabama. Today, we are hosting the Braintrust. I get to do this with my very dear friend, Congressman Butterfield from North Carolina. And there's nothing more, yes, give him a hand. There's nothing more important to both of us. I think it's very personal for me, having grown up in Selma, Alabama. After all, it was in Selma where John Lewis and those freedom fighters bled, marched, prayed for the right to vote, the equal right of every American to vote. As John would say, the vote is sacred, very sacred. It is the most powerful, nonviolent tool that we have in our democracy, and we must use it. We must use it. But we also know that people are trying to make us lose it. Voter suppression is real. I would have never thought that 51 years after the march from Selma to Montgomery, that I would first be a member of Congress as a little girl growing up in Selma, but secondly, that the cause for which John Lewis and those freedom fighters fought would become our cause too. There is a systematic effort to dismantle the Voting Rights Act of 1965, and we shouldn't take it sitting down. We have to be out in the streets fighting, and all of our panelists today are experts in voting rights and are, more importantly, warriors for voting rights. All of us need to be warriors for voting rights. I think it is not lost on any of us that the very state that brought us the Voting Rights Act of 1965, Alabama, is also the state that brought us the Shelby versus Holder decision. And next week, we will be, the Supreme Court will be taking up the Milligan case, which is also courtesy of Alabama. And I know that the plaintiff for that is in the audience. If he would stand, Evan Milligan, please. Thank you so much for standing up for Alabama and for the rest of the world. We really appreciate you. Really appreciate you. So without further ado, I'm going to bring up my partner, the Honorable G.K. Butterfield from the great state of North Carolina. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Congresswoman. Good morning, good morning, good morning. Now, in my prior life, I was a lawyer, voting rights attorney in North Carolina. After that, I served as a judge in my state for 15 years, and for 18 long years now, I have served in the U.S. House of Representatives. Currently, I am the chairman of the Subcommittee on Elections, and so I know a little bit about this topic today. And so thank you for your willingness to come out and share in this conversation. You know, members of Congress must always be sensitive to protocol, but I could take my whole 5 minutes and use it on protocol to talk about how important Starbucks is and Lyft and the League of Women Voters, but we're not going to do that. We're just going to get right into the meat of this program. On August 6, 1965, just days after I graduated from high school, President Johnson signed into law the 1965 Voting Rights Act. Many of our friends across the country don't fully understand the protections provided by the Voting Rights Act. And so this session this morning is intended to enlighten you on the Voting Rights Act's history and share with you a reality. The reality is, and the Congresswoman just alluded to it, the reality is the Voting Rights Act is currently under attack. The original Voting Rights Act did many things, but I will highlight 3 things. It eliminated the literacy test. A lot of people don't realize that. That literacy test enacted in 1899, 1900, requiring African Americans to read and write and to satisfy a registrar that they were literate, that was eliminated by the Voting Rights Act. It was also enacted a Section 2, which extended to minority communities, and in the beginning it was African American communities, the right to litigate any claim they had against a voting system or practice or procedure. It's called Section 2. It gives private plaintiffs and the Attorney General the right to bring an action against a jurisdiction claiming discrimination in voting. But then there was a third section, Section 5. Section 5 singled out certain jurisdictions, particularly in the South, that had a long-standing history of voter discrimination and voter disenfranchisement, requiring those jurisdictions to pre-clear, to get approval of any change in voting, get the approval from the U.S. Department of Justice or from the D.C. District Court. And so the Voting Rights Act has worked tremendously well down through the years. It has increased African-American political participation. We now have 58 members of the Congressional Black Caucus and hundreds serving at the state level. Unthinkable 50 years ago. But you must know and understand that the Voting Rights Act is under assault. It's under assault for one reason: to dilute the voting strength of black and brown communities so white Republicans can win elections. And Roland Martin gave me permission to say that, and I want to repeat it again because it is real. It is real. The purpose of it is to dilute the voting strength of black and brown communities so white Republicans can win elections. It started in 2013 when the Supreme Court struck down the formula for determining which jurisdictions are subject to preclearance. It continued last year in a case out of Arizona where the court made it more difficult to litigate Section 2 cases. The court's holding elevates the burden of proof and makes it more difficult to win cases. Next week, and you saw the plaintiff a moment ago, the Supreme Court will hear arguments in the Alabama case to determine if Section 2 required protecting black communities in Alabama by creating a second majority-minority district. My friends, it doesn't stop there. The Supreme Court has decided to hear another case from my state of North Carolina where the authority of state courts is being challenged to determine the constitutionality of an elections law under state constitutions. That's a big deal, and I'm sure the panelists will get into it. We have a democratically controlled Supreme Court in North Carolina that has been fairly deciding cases. The courts want to take away, the Supreme Court wants to take away the power of state courts to litigate these cases. The plaintiffs in the North Carolina case call it independent state legislatures. In other words, courts, it's none of your business. When the legislative body decides to enact a law affecting voting, we are the final word and not the courts. This is a big deal. I conclude by giving you breaking news. Republican operatives are determined to weaken and possibly eliminate the Voting Rights Act. The power to stop that is in our hands. So thank you today for coming. It is now my pleasure to bring up to the stage a man that I ran into in Sierra Leone 2 or 3 months ago. I went to an environmental justice program last week in Warren County, North Carolina, and he was there, and he's here with us today. Please welcome Roland Martin.
Appreciate it, Congressman Butterfield. That was one hell of a 2-minute speech. All right, before we bring up Eric Holder.
Hello, everybody. You know, there is no policy discussion today more important, in my opinion, than how we protect and strengthen the right to vote. So I'd like to thank each of you for taking time out of your schedules to be a part of this discussion today, and more significantly, for being a part of this fight. I'd like to single out Evan Milligan, the plaintiff in the Alabama redistricting case, for his work and for his dedication especially. Also want to thank Congresswoman Terry Sewell and Congressman C.K. Butterfield, the Voting Rights Braintrust co-chairs, for all of their work in bringing together so many legal policy and advocacy experts here today. You know, this collaboration will bring about great ideas. Of that, I don't think there can be any doubt. You know, as a country, we have struggled for generations to attain a core national ideal: one person, one vote. And today, more than ever before, there is rightfully, I think, a growing concern across the country about the state of our democracy. I mean, you can't look at the actions taken in state legislatures, at the cases before the United States Supreme Court, or the hundreds of election deniers on the ballot this fall without becoming concerned. Since the insurrection on January the 6th, more than 390 restrictive voting bills have been proposed in 39 state legislatures. And in this year, of the 87 Republican nominees for offices that administer elections, nearly 2/3, 54 of them, are election deniers. And then we get to the Supreme Court, which has on its docket two of the most significant voting rights cases in a generation. In Merrill versus Milligan, the court's going to consider the future of Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act. And that issue is fair representation for people of color in the state of Alabama, whose voices and whose votes will matter. Already, a federal three-judge panel, including 2 Trump-appointed judges, stated that Alabama's congressional map violated the Voting Rights Act. But should the Supreme Court side with Republicans in this case, it could remove significant protections against racial vote dilution in Alabama and across the nation. Now, in the second case, Moore versus Harper, a bedrock principle of our democracy is being challenged. That's our system of checks and balances. Now, North Carolina Republicans are attempting to nullify state constitutional provisions protecting voters so that they can have near total control over federal elections to politicians in state legislatures. Now, if the Supreme Court sides with the North Carolina Republicans, they would be granting state legislatures more power to infringe on voting rights, to gerrymander, all without the check of a state court. These cases could have a broad-reaching impact, but it's no surprise they start as redistricting cases because the fight against gerrymandering is a key part of the fight to protect the power of the vote, particularly for communities of color. And that's why I founded the National Democratic Redistricting Committee 6 years ago. And that's why our 501c3 affiliate, the National Redistricting Foundation, has really been a key part in both of these cases since the very beginning. We're doing everything that we can to show that rightfully why these cases are ones that we should win. The fact is that both cases present really straightforward questions for the court to address, questions that have actually already been answered by existing precedent. But taken together, the outcome of these cases will have not only important implications for our ongoing fight for voting rights, but also determine the future of our democracy. This is a moment of reckoning for this nation. Equal representation and voter protection should not be partisan issues. Democracy should not be a controversial issue, let alone a partisan one, and yet here we are. With so much on the line, I cannot think of a better group of people to be gathering for a conversation about concrete steps that can be taken to protect the franchise and get Americans out to vote in the upcoming midterm election. You know, we owe a debt to those who came before us, who sacrificed, who suffered, who died, so that we might all have the rights to which all American citizens are entitled. And chief among them is the right to vote. We repay that debt by doing the work now and doing it in the future. So thank you for your time this morning. Thank you for the work that you will do tomorrow. And thank you for your commitment to never stop fighting for the right to vote. Thanks again.
All right, we're going to bring up our first panel right now. LaShawn Warren, she's the Chief Policy Officer for the Southern Poverty Law Center. Damon Hewitt, Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights Under Law. And Maya Wiley, President and CEO for the Leadership Conference on Civil and Human Rights. We often talk about the Black Freedom Movement. First of all, for the folks who are watching, there's this streaming on the CBC website. It's also streaming on my OTT network, Black Star Network. So text folks, put it on social media. If they're not here, they can actually watch the live stream of this in real time. There is no Black Freedom Movement, some call it Civil Rights Movement, without protest, but also without lawyers. And so you have to have the battle going on. Right now, there literally is a legal war happening in America. Put it in the context for folks to understand the type of battles, the fight that is actually happening in courtrooms by folks on the other side who are trying to use every single legal strategy they can to strip folks of the right to vote, not just African Americans, Latinos, young voters, as well, and in many places, Democratic voters, where they're turning out in significant numbers. Anyone can start. Is three of y'all somebody hot?
So look, I'll start. First, thank you, Roland. Thank you, Congresswoman Sewell and Butterfield. Damon Hewitt from the Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights, where we ensure that black people have voice, opportunity, and power to change these things, to make the promises of democracy real. So the example I'll give is this. After Hurricane Katrina, New Orleans is devastated, my hometown. Everybody's trying to get their houses rebuilt, some with themselves. My dad did a lot himself, my late father, on our own house. And he would go to the house and try to get some things done and bring contractors over, and they have tools there. Now, the house is flooded, 5 feet of water. The whole neighborhood, the whole community is devastated. And every now and then he'd go back to the house and realize, dang, somebody just stole some of our tools. Somebody broke in and took some of our tools. That's what it feels like. Black America has been devastated for quite some time. We strive and persevere, but the tools that we're supposed to have, Section 5, and then they tell us you still have Section 2, the tools keep getting taken away from us. So how can we actually build or repair this house of democracy and build black power if our tools keep getting taken away? That's the best way I can put it.
So I will add one as a new leader of the Leadership Conference on Civil and Human Rights, just 5 months in, but with these outstanding leaders, including leaders that will be on the next panel, but especially with partners in the House, of which both our Congresswoman Sewell and Congressman Butterfield are critical partners. So I just want to name those tools in the toolbox. Critical leadership. But let's just understand that the courts are not going to save us. I am saying this as an attorney. The courts are not going to save us. And I say this because it's obvious, but I also want to just say what has been happening in the courts, to Damon's point about taking the tools from the toolbox. It's also been a lot of lying. We do have to tell the truth, because there's a big lie. I call it the big old lie, because it didn't just start with Donald Trump. It actually started in 2010, before Shelby, that said that basically people of color, and let's be explicit, immigrants of color in particular, Mexicans in particular, were lining up to vote to steal our democracy. So the wedge for black people was those people are your problem, and for white people was those people are your problem. And there was only one problem. People who were starting to see that the changing demographics of the country meant that they either had to show up on the policy issues people of color cared about and figure out the solutions, or they could lie, stay in power. They chose the lie, the big lie. And the big lie started getting organized politically in 2010. And look, I'm not being partisan. There is documented statements by operatives in Florida and in other states that actually said it. If we make it harder for black people to vote, if we make it harder for Latinos to vote, we'll win. That's not how democracy is supposed to work. But this is what the court did. Because we keep talking about Shelby. I want to go back before Shelby. I want to go back to Purcell in 2006 out of Arizona, when voter ID laws were being challenged in court. What was this? Oh, you know, it's too close to the election to stop the shenanigans, because then voters will be confused about all the ways we're making it hard for them to vote. So rather than unconfusing them about all the ways we're making it hard for them to vote with voter ID laws, we'll just let it stand through the election. That was 2006. I call this a get election free card. It's a get election free card. Now, since then, we have 4 states that got an election free card now in this cycle: Georgia, Alabama, Ohio, and Louisiana. See, we got a congresswoman over here mouthing the states for me because she's been fighting, right? And plus, she's in one of them. So, but this is the point I just want to make clear to you. That is 5 to 7 congressional seats impacted by a court that said, we will let unconstitutional statutes based on lies stand because it'll be too close to the election to not just let them take it.
Well, in fact, in the Louisiana case, the judge said that was a hell of a lot of time because their primary is actually on November. And then the court said, oh, I know it's 9 months, but that's still not enough time, which is like mind-boggling when there literally was enough time to change.
Which is a lie.
Yeah, absolutely. LaShawn, when we talk about, Maya talked about there being documented evidence. First of all, you had the leader of Republicans in Pennsylvania who was on video saying, we will win in 2012. We will win with voter ID. They were very clear about that. So when I talk about this war, again, for people who don't quite understand these battles that are going on, I mean, we're talking about well-funded folks, and they are throwing everything. And so the folks who believe in voting rights, I mean, there really is a 24/7, 365 battle happening in courtrooms nationwide on the federal level and the state level.
So, good morning. I want to thank Congresswoman Sewell and Congressman Butterfield for holding this very important and I think critical conversation at a moment in history that we will never forget. When we think about January 6th and all that we were able to see and the challenges to our democracy, it was very unsettling. But just to kind of ground the conversation, I think it's important to recognize that throughout our history, the right to vote and who can exercise that right has always been and continues to be a constant struggle. When you look at the U.S. Constitution, the 15th Amendment that barred race from a consideration for voting, when you look at the 19th Amendment that barred gender from consideration for voting, when you look at the 24th Amendment, the 26th Amendment, all of those efforts was to make sure that our country actually lived up to its principles and represented the people, that it was a representative democracy. But none of that came without struggle and without fights. There was agitation, and we have to continue to agitate in order to move us forward. Now, one of the things that I think is worth mentioning is during COVID, it devastated our communities. And, you know, there were businesses, not only from the health perspective, but there were businesses that were there before that we no longer will see. In terms of education, there has been significant lapse in education as a result of COVID. But one of the things that COVID did was it opened an opportunity for us to be innovative with how we do our elections. And so it opened up an opportunity for people who would not otherwise have an opportunity to participate. So we saw a tremendous uptick in voter participation after during the Biden-Trump election. And as a result of that, what was the response? Instead of celebrating having more people participate in the political process, there were states around the country, primarily in a number of the states where we have a presence at the Southern Poverty Law Center, that passed laws to make it more difficult for people to vote.
Even when they won those states, they said still make it harder.
That's exactly right. They were closing polling places in predominantly black communities, purging voters, just wreaking havoc. And that still is happening at this very moment. And one of the things that I think is worth mentioning here, we always go to Shelby County in 2013, but right after the Voting Rights Act was reauthorized in 2006, in 2009, there was a Texas case, what we call the MUD case, the Northwest Municipal Utility District, that challenged the voting rights reauthorization
out of Austin,
immediately.
Texas.
Yes, immediately. And so this has been ongoing for a long period of time. Folks have had their eyes set on Section 5 and Section 2 for a long period of time. This is not something new. And just like Maya said, while the courts are there, we cannot rely on them. We have to figure out another system and another way to address some of the issues that we are talking about right now, because not having a representative that will look out for our interests is not an option.
Well, I'll point about we can't rely on the states, on the courts, but I think oftentimes when we're talking about that, we're speaking about that from a federal level. I'm a native of Texas. You have judges that are elected. And so when we're talking about this issue of voting, I think we have to connect the dots to get folks to understand, you have elected judges that are making decisions. And so what has to happen is our folks have to understand that, look, you're not voting just for president or United States Senator or member of Congress. You're voting for governors, state rep, state senate, judges, DAs, all down the line, and all of that has a direct impact on these voting laws, because what we've seen is what happened in North Carolina after Obama won by 14,100 votes in 2008. They changed the laws. Maura Mondays and others clawed that back. Democrats took a 4-3 lead on the state Supreme Court, which then changed a number of those laws. Voting made the change in that state court happen. And I think that we have to talk about that a lot more so folks understand. Don't ignore those state Supreme Court justices, because in North Carolina, Sheriff Beasley is running for the U.S. Senate right now, but she lost by 400 votes in 2020, and Dems could have had a 6-1 advantage versus 4-3. And I think that's also part of the strategy, getting our folks to understand, don't ignore those judicial races that down ballot.
So you just said, Roland, as always, you just said so many important things, and I want to name 3 embedded also in that. I mean, one is, when I said we can't rely on courts to save us, that doesn't mean we don't fight for courts. In fact, it's one of the reasons we have to vote, because why do you think we have the jerry-rigged Supreme Court we have right now, right? Because it is our electeds who determine who sits in those very powerful seats at the federal level. And we at the Leadership Conference have worked aggressively to help make the history that's been made, and I say this through all our members because it's a collective, it's a collaborative, it's a coalition, that we have helped see over 77 new judges to the federal bench, that actually 58 of whom we have explicitly supported because they care about civil rights. They care about protecting our rights, not taking them away.
And actually, that's more judges confirmed in Biden's first 2 years than Trump confirmed in his first 2 years. So our voting made that happen.
Yes, and there are another 42 in the pipeline nominated right now. And so actually moving as many of those through as we can get through now matters a lot in terms of that. So it's not that we give up, but it's also recognizing that our organizing, our on-the-ground work, and I know we've got tremendous leaders that are going to be talking about that next, is actually a critical part of the strategy. And to your point, but the other thing to name is the census. Okay? The census, right? Because in 2020, they also tried to take that from us. No, they tried to take it all. So this is the thing. What we have to do is focus on where...
Yeah, because they saw what was happening for the next 10 years.
Well, if you aren't counted, you don't count. If you aren't counted, you don't count. So what do? They say, let's put a citizenship question on. We'll try to scare people from actually being counted. They actually cut the budget on the census. See, people don't actually realize even before that, even before Donald Trump, by not adding the money necessary to do an appropriate count, states, and this is to your point, Roland, about state legislatures, had to come in with their own money out of pocket to try to reach our communities, to get grants to community. And the states that did a good job, it's because they resourced community-based leaders in communities of color, the communities that are undercounted, to ensure that we got the count up.
Well, in fact, Texas chose not to spend money. Then when they realized, oh, damn, we're actually going to lose congressional seats if we don't, they tried to ramp up at the last second because they saw how they could benefit from it.
So this is dollars, and it's electoral power. That's what that count represents. So we have to fight for all that power.
And when we talk about dollars, and I'll say this particularly because I had to cuss out one of the ad agencies. No, because see, I need y'all to understand. I'm trying to connect the dots. The Congressional Black Caucus fought for an additional $70+ million to actually be added to the budget to specifically target African Americans. The white ad agencies that control the money froze out the black ad agency, Carol H. Williams, from being able to do that. And so I had to literally blast Young and Rubicam, and I will name them every damn time, publicly. And then they call her and they said, "Why? Where's this coming from?" She said, "Because y'all ain't responded." They specifically locked out black-owned media from the ad dollars, and that's one of the reasons why our community could not get the messaging, because they froze us out. So not just they cut the money, the white ad agencies control the entire flow. It throws out black ad agencies, throws out black-owned media, and that's one of the reasons why you didn't see as many ads in our community. That's another game that they play. Damien, you want to make a point?
Well, I was going to say, to your point about litigation still being important, not the only thing, but that's why we sued to stop the slowdown of the census. And because of that, millions more people were counted. Now, we still know, sadly, there's a built-in flaw. Every time we get a census figure, we know we get a readout about here's what the black undercount is. It's like we know it's going to happen. A black undercount, a Latinx undercount, we know it's going to happen. So we have to scrap for everything, and that's why the litigation was important, but the messaging was important as well. I just want to go back to the connection between the litigation and the messaging, because I do believe everything's a narrative. You know, GK was a trial lawyer. You know, our trial lawyers, the people who are going to argue the Supreme Court coming up in the Milligan case and other cases we're arguing as well before the court, we know there's always a story to be told. The story we're being sold is, first, that there's no discrimination, period, in voting. But then you can't find it in the daytime with a flashlight. But then they say, well, it's there, but in the Brnovich case that former A.G. Holder talked about, the court said, well, look, there's some discrimination, but it's not that much of a burden. I mean, it's kind of the usual burdens of voting.
How hard is it to get an ID?
Exactly. And just because there's a racial disparity doesn't mean it's discriminatory. And look, but this is the most sinister part that I have to say about the litigation piece, what the courts are doing. Just what we know about Justice Alito is that he's going to do him. And this man likes to time travel. And you saw in the Dobbs decision on abortion rights, he went back centuries to look at standards back then, citing people who didn't even believe that women were human beings, that women were witches, that black women basically didn't exist. In the Brnovich case, he said, well, we should really look to what was in place in 1982. And this is the same thing that in his concurring opinion, Justice Thomas did in the gun control case, the New York case. He went back in time and said, well, we didn't limit bazookas and AK-47s when the Constitution was written. So the narrative they're telling us...
And bazookas didn't even exist.
Exactly. The narrative they're telling us is what you're saying is happening isn't happening, but if it's happening, it's actually not as bad as you say, black people. Get over yourselves. That's the narrative. So we need the litigation, but we also need the streets. We do need both join hand in hand to fight this narrative.
Well, LaShawn, to that particular point, we talked about narrative. Look, Freedom's Journal was the nation's first black newspaper, and this is what they wrote on March 16, 1827. We wish to plead our own cause, too long have others spoken for us. When I'm talking about connecting the dots, as someone who has to deal with this every day, so many of our folks don't know what we're talking about here. And I think oftentimes it's a conversation at 30,000 feet, and it has to be a consistent deal by saying, no, when this happens, you don't get resources, census. When this happens, you don't get representation. When you don't get representation, you don't get this. And then people go, hold on. All that stuff is connected? Yes. So when they say my vote doesn't matter, even if they're in a so-called red district, I'm constantly saying, no, it does. Let's walk you through. And then they realize it. Look, the expansion of Latinos in Texas, they saw the numbers of what the Republicans do because they control the state. They protected largely white Republicans. And even Latinos were upset. What I've argued to Latinos in Texas is y'all got to make a hell of a lot more noise about losing representation. And so, again, I think that has to happen, the connecting of the dots so people understand that this over here actually impacts this over here because all of this stuff is linked.
It's all interconnected, and I'm so glad that you're pointing out this portrait. It's a big picture that we should be focusing on. Having representation matters. It changes who gets resources and who doesn't get resources. In situations where where they're unable to elect a candidate of their choice, it matters with respect to the kinds of schools that they get. It matters with respect to police accountability. It matters with respect to things like transportation infrastructure. And in Mississippi, that's a good example. That failing infrastructure did not happen yesterday. That was a long period of neglect.
But the governor is actually now on record saying he purposely did not send funds to Jackson for water.
And you know,
when he was the state treasurer.
And what's interesting about that is that Mississippi has a significant black population.
Largest black population in the country.
And they have not been able to elect someone to a black person to a statewide position since Reconstruction. And the same thing goes for Louisiana.
And because you get a whole bunch of Isaiah T. Montgomerys then and now.
And it matters.
Yeah.
So I think we need to make sure that in terms of our litigation, because we're doing litigation too and getting the message out, we need to invest in the infrastructure of some of the groups on the ground that are doing the work. So our organization, the Southern Poverty Law Center, under the direction of Margaret Huang, we have decided to dedicate $100 million over the next 10 years to organizations on the ground that are doing this work. Because we need to build a movement, and we can't wait until there's an issue and then try to respond.
Because the other side, that's what they've done.
They have been planning this for many years.
The thing I will add to it before I go to questions is there has to be, and look, it's not self-serving, but you have to have a media component to every single one of these, because if no one even knows what you're doing, other than that particular group, then it's part of the problem. We have less than 10 minutes for the panel. We're going to take questions. They have mics. I ain't using the mics. I got the microphone. Keep it. I'm holding it. No need for you to touch the microphone. So we're going to take a question. So I'm going to take a question here and that side. So who wants that? Who wants to ask a question first? Right here? I got it. Put your hands down. Name, where you're from, question.
Hello, I'm Lisa Williams. I'm from Arlington, Virginia. And my question is, we talk a lot about people of color and black and brown, and I was watching recently on CNN where they talked about a lot of the Latinx community is moving towards the GOP. So my question to you is, how do we pull them back in and realize that we share the same fight? We don't have different fights. We have the same fight. I saw on the CNN special, they said that their motto is God, family, country. And we pretty much have we believe the same things. How do we pull them back in and help them realize we have the same fight?
So one thing, this has been bothering me for a while, is that what the media says is not always representative of the community.
Because they don't look like the community.
No. And I just want to say this because while all these news stories were coming out about all these Latinos that were voting for GOP, it was the same point where actually some academic research was coming out saying this was overblown and untrue. So I just want to say that same thing's being said about black men right now, which is like suddenly, even though 86% of black men have not shifted position, it's all of a sudden black men are. Now, I'm not saying there aren't issues. I'm not saying and look, we are not partisan at the leadership conference. We don't tell people who to vote for. We talk about what we should all be voting for and whether anyone we're voting for is going to deliver what we need. But I think that is the point, right? And I'll use Virginia as a great example of this. Going back to the messaging and how we talk, is if you look at what Governor Youngkin said when he ran for office, right? The media covered CRT. The media covered CRT. I went back and looked at his messaging. Here was his messaging. We have to teach history, and we won't shy away from our hard history. And we also need to make sure we have high-level math, and everybody, all our kids who have special needs, get the special needs, the resources that they need to be the learners we know they can be. How many of you disagree with any of that? So if you listen to the national news, all Youngkin was saying was we're going to screw people of color, which, by the way, was part of the messaging. It was just way down there. But all his top lines were things we want. It just wasn't what he was going to deliver. So I think we have to unpack what are people hearing, not who are people, but based on identity. And so there is a lot of money flowing into misinformation and disinformation.
Oh, huge, huge.
And the media covers and I mean, I say that having done MSNBC, y'all know this, but where we have to actually challenge some of the media narrative.
Not some, a hell of a whole lot. But, and again, the folks in the executive suite do not look like us. Question.
Hi,
Put your hands down. I got this.
Stephanie Thomas, Norwalk, Connecticut. I am really concerned about the ISL case.
What is that?
The independent state legislature case that was referred to earlier. And we have certainly blocked legislation in supposedly blue Connecticut that was introduced last year. And I've been running around raising the alarm about it, but the Supreme Court is the Supreme Court. What can I tell people to do other than educating them that it exists?
Well, we have to bring people back to the history. There's very little difference between the independent state legislature theory and the theory of interposition that you saw during the height of the civil rights movement, where they said segregation now, segregation tomorrow, segregation forever, when George Wallace stood in the schoolhouse door months before the Lawyers Committee was founded. That's why a lot of our organizations exist today, because of the same kinds of cockamamie theories. Look, even some of the things that Trump said about Make America Great Again, David Duke was saying that 20, 30 years earlier, right? So we have to teach people that this stuff isn't new and innocuous. It's actually as old as this earth is, and it's very dangerous. That it's not some type of independent, well, no pun intended, it's not some type of theory that, oh, well, this is a way we can think about things. No, this is all part of a plan that has been in place for a very long time.
But states' rights, I mean, let's call it what it is. It's a states' rights argument. That's the slave state argument. That's like, and let's use plain language. What the Supreme Court's trying to bring us is states' rights, and they mean 1767.
Actually, I think it's even deeper than states' rights. It's because the state, what they're saying, state Supreme Courts, we won't even listen to you. So they're like,
it's the rights of white majorities in those states.
Right,
and the state legislature.
Which is what states' rights really meant. That's my point.
Yeah, they don't even want to listen to their own court.
Well, but this is the point, though, is and this is why, and I want to go back to what Roland said. It's actually about building the power in the states as well in order to press. In some instances, you saw it happen in Kansas after Dobbs, as women were up in arms. They said, you ain't going to change our Constitution, our state Constitution. So those fights around state constitutional provisions and frankly, like hold some electeds accountable, because what they're really trying to do is they're going to say we're going to try to take the independent power of the judiciary away.
Yep.
Then it's even more important to show up, vote, and be real loud, boisterous, noisy, and disrupt when they do crazy stuff.
Oh, in North Carolina, when the Democrats took a majority of the court, they literally tried to strip the power of the Supreme Court to the court underneath them because they control that court. I mean, that's how dashly they're trying to do. Question.
Incorporated. Generation Z may be our survival for the future. Right now, there's 8 million kids that can vote. I would just like to hear some feedback as to how you feel we can pull them into this election, a midterm and the following election especially.
So here's what we're going to do. We're going to actually answer that question with our next panel, because they're actually on the ground to actually answer that question. But I will reframe your question for our legal panel. Explain how they are specifically removing voting locations from college campuses to keep them from voting, the legal hurdles they're putting in place to specifically target that group of voters.
So look, every HBCU campus around this country, especially Prairie View, they hate Prairie View. I don't know what it is.
Easy. It's in Waller County, and Waller County is white.
Exactly. Well, you explained it. So basically,
I'm only from Texas.
They try to get the young people confused. They say, oh, well, you can't use a P.O. box that's on your campus union, your campus mailbox. They say, oh, well, you're registered somewhere else, so you can't register here. None of these things are actually true, right? But they get the young people confused, and they look to places like Florida, where we know people are being prosecuted, they're being entrapped. They're being led to believe, oh, your right to vote's been restored, and they say, psych, now we're going to prosecute you because we have election police. So it's the whole game is a chilling effect. And they're playing on the notion that young people are disaffected anyway, don't believe in politics anyway, so they shouldn't vote. And that narrative sometimes works. We can't allow it to work. We have to get our young people back to the roots. They're more savvy than most of us. I'm just going to be honest, right? But we need to show them that there's other ways that they can actually mobilize, and that the power of the vote is so sacred, as John Lewis reminded us, so sacred, so important, that it's not just about voting, it's about fighting for that right to vote each and every day. and we have to honor our ancestors by making sure we follow suit.
LaShawn, then Maya.
Yes, okay, so very quickly, one of the things that I wanted to uplift is that we launched a campaign to do exactly what the questioner was asking about, to target younger people and bring them into the fold. The campaign is Our Future, Our Vote, just to really make sure that and we're investing in colleges across the country to help them register to vote and to get out to vote. So that's one of the things that's very important to us. But before we end, I really want to make sure that we uplift the John Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act. We really need to get that bill passed. I mean, we've been talking about the legal barriers. That would help to restore Section 5, which is absolutely critical in order for us to address these issues in a very proactive way.
But you can't get it But you can't get it passed unless you change the composition. And I'll say this here: tell your media people, all this stuff y'all launching, I ain't heard. And so again. That's why I keep saying, stuff is launched, but if you do not have the media piece to tell everybody else, and so, and again, I own it, so I ain't got to ask nobody. So tell them to hit a brother up. Maya, go.
Well, I just wanted, so I actually thought Damon was going to talk. Lawyers Committee's been doing an excellent job on election protection, which is why I think this point, particularly about young people, because young people are a target. So I just wanted to shout that out.
866 Our Vote. Our Vote.
Our Vote. And there's coalitional work around organizing to make sure with all of our partners, NAACP, League of Women Voters, we got to keep, I won't go through the list because we'll be here all day.
Yeah, because they actually next. I'm going to go through the list.
Because more is coming. But the point is there's a lot of collective organizing around making sure we're covering election protection everywhere. And then that does link back to litigation because it means the legal teams then sue, go to court when they need to, when it's necessary in our communities. But I also want to just link back to messaging.
You got about 20 seconds.
20 seconds is our young people don't know what we've won just in this last cycle. And so they think it doesn't matter what they do. I'm sorry, my kids are 21, 18. They don't care what our ancestors did. I mean, they care, but it's not what motivates them.
Very true.
What they need to hear is we got that passed in the House and almost through the Senate, except we couldn't deal with the filibuster, which that is the problem. And when you show up as the most powerful block of voters because of your size, particularly if you're young people of color, you have the power to make the difference and get it passed.
Which means you got to talk to them like you talk to them. I bought that computer. I bought those shoes. It's the same thing. Y'all got to know how to message right. All right. Give it up for our legal scholars, folks. Introducing our panel two right now, coming to the stage, Latasha Brown. She's the co-founder of Black Voters Matter. Heather Foster is Senior Director for the National Policy Engagement for LIFT. Virginia Case Solomon is the CEO for the League of Women Voters. Derek Johnson, President and CEO, NAACP. And Congresswoman Terry Sewell got real black and said, I'm joining the next panel. So Congresswoman Terry Sewell from the state of Alabama, please welcome our next panel. I know that. Take a seat. You're right there. Hey. All right. You should should be a microphone in each one of your I got yours. Is microphone there, Derek? You got one over there? There's not a microphone? All right, we need one microphone over here. There you go. All right, yeah, bring that one from the floor. Congresswoman, you'll take this one out over here. All right, then. All right. So here we go. Yep. I want to start with this way. The last panel just ended perfectly in that, talking about, that'd be great. What happens on the ground? We'll start with you, Latasha. You all have spent a number of time going to places that are long being ignored. Just give folks an understanding of what y'all saw and heard when you were going to places in deep Georgia, deep Alabama, Mississippi, and so many places, and folks were saying, we hadn't seen anybody come to us during election year to talk to us about voting.
Thank you for asking the question, Roland. You know, there are a couple of things You know, when we started going, when Black Voters Matter, when we started going out on the ground, we were very intentional about the Black Belt region, right, throughout from North Carolina all the way over to the Mississippi Delta, because oftentimes what we would see is that in those states, rural voters were just kind of dismissed. That if there were counties that, even though there were Black voters, that because it wasn't the majority, sometimes state party leadership would just simply ignore and underinvest in those places. And so we actually created a strategy that not only also invests into the rural areas. And if you look at what happened in Georgia, when you look at the margin of difference, that in Georgia in those counties, while some of those counties went Republican, what you saw is a height in the raise and the turnout number in Black voters in those rural counties that actually shaved off 100 here, 500 here, 1,000 here. And so ultimately what happened, we were able to turn the state.
You were closing margins.
We were closing margins, not because of what happened in Atlanta necessarily, right? Atlanta was certainly a key place, but it was also because of those rural areas being a rise in Black voter turnout in those rural areas. In addition to that, I think when we go out, we see the same kind of frustration, but we also see, like in places like Georgia and other places, there's been a long-term impact with particularly in the South, of the refusal of governors to expand the ACA, right? And so you see in places like Georgia, throughout the South, where there's been massive closings of hospitals, right? You're seeing, and oftentimes in those areas, a hospital is an economic center. But the third and final thing that I want to say related to it is, I wish I had the luxury just to talk about voting rights right now, but I really want to get real with people. What is really important right now, we are in fascism. And that may not be popular for me to say, right, but it's the truth. At the bottom line, what we are up against right now is not just about voting rights. We have to shut down white supremacy. We are literally seeing cities where there are African Americans that have actually won office, that there are folks that are refusing in Alabama, that are refusing to even give them. What we are seeing is the changing of rules, that at this point you're not legitimate or seen as a legitimate voter. So what we will do is change the rules to keep you from actually participating. We're seeing laws passed, not just voter suppression laws. We're seeing laws around protests and other things. And so I'm raising that because I really want us to know what time it is, that at the end of the day, this is in there three things. One, yes, we're talking about why we need to vote, there are three things. I'll just say real quickly. One, we need to have progressive policies to address the needs of our issues. Number two, we've got to reduce the harm. And number three, we have to shut down and be unequivocal about shutting down white supremacy. And we have to really recognize that we're in that moment.
Derek, Latasha talked about the issue of the Affordable Care Act. Reverend Barber, when he spoke at the NAACP convention when he was in Vegas, he told this story of being in North Carolina with some parade, he said, and this redneck walked up with a Confederate flag around his neck, but he had tears in his eyes. And he said, Reverend Barber, I want to thank you because y'all have been fighting for our hospital. And what he has been saying is, he said, you got white folks in rural America, you got black folks in rural America. He said, but guess what? They get sick too. And so by connecting that issue, he said, I'm going to get rid of that flag one day. He said, but connecting that when we're fighting for Medicaid expansion, it ain't just for black folks. That's part of this grassroots effort that I've seen from different groups, really expanding the idea of getting people to understand how policies are affecting them where they live. So talk about that as well from an NAACP perspective and your perspective in Mississippi, how getting people to look at the policy, how it impacts their life, as opposed to skin color or as opposed to being progressive or liberal or Republican. No, this impacts you.
So for the NAACP, and thank you for the question, Roland, we are beginning to recognize more than ever what's necessary and what's sufficient. So I'm going to use Jackson, for example. It's necessary to send a bottle of water, but it's not sufficient to fix a problem. What's sufficient to fix the problem is to address the structural issue around the state of Mississippi taking federal funds intended for the city of Jackson and diverting those funds. That veteran don't care about that because what comes before his health is white supremacy. So until we build black power to understand the difference between what's necessary versus sufficient, we'll be on this treadmill and making noise outside the door and not at the door making policy. And so our goal as NAACP is get to what's sufficient, but do what's necessary. What's sufficient is filing a Title VI claim against the state of Mississippi on Tuesday to force the state of Mississippi to address its 3-decade-long starving of resources from the city of Jackson. What's sufficient is to make sure in the former Confederate states we get federal judges appointed before the November election. Because over 52% of black folks live in those southern states, it is not well enough for this administration to say we appointed more judges than Trump did. I don't care about that. Are you appointing judges where black folks live and where the harm is taking place? That's what the opportunity is. And so how do we use all the tools in our tools box, including what's necessary so we can get to sufficiency, because the noise is not going to change the public policy, and it's the public policies that's going to improve the quality of life of those that we represent.
Virginia, my parents have been involved in elections. They still work the polls, all that stuff. So I've been around it all my life. And the reality is, all across the country, for decades, the League of Women Voters has just been seen as a nonpartisan group believing in the elections. But you literally now have folks attacking your organization because y'all actually believe in democracy and for everybody being able to vote. The importance of informing voters. Talk about that, but also how are you fighting misinformation and disinformation, because that also is so huge today.
Thank you. So one of the things I want to say is it's not just because we believe in democracy. Like, I'm the first Hispanic woman to run the organization ever. We have our only second black board president in the entire history of the organization. 4 years ago when I came, we made a very conscious decision. We were going to center racial equity in every part of our work. And so the more that we've seen attacks on the work that we are doing, people not wanting to show up for our debates, for example, the more attacks our organization has faced, it's because we've been centering racial equity. And it's the right thing to do, but we also know that that exposes us to more attacks. So I want to say that a lot of institutions talk a good game about wanting to be transformative in their work.
They lying.
But what we decided we were going to do was we were going to dismantle all of our systems that didn't work for us in our organization. We had to revise every policy, our hiring policies. When we talk about dismantling white supremacy, it has to start with white organizations. And so that's something that we have been committed to. And
Girl, don't make me drop this mic.
But I'm very proud of that, right? And it's because we have an amazing staff at the national office, but because these old white ladies who used to run the organization took a look in the mirror and they said, we got to do better. We had, when we were on the march this year for the Jubilee, we had a woman from our organization from Alabama who had never gone to the march before. And I remember Tasha and I were talking about this, and she came up to Tasha and she was holding a Black Voters Matter sign. She said that her family enslaved people generations ago. And she wanted to walk with that sign, and she is fighting to dismantle white supremacy in Alabama because she believes that she said, I want to be my ancestors' worst nightmare. Now think about that. So I share that because I want to just say that it's really important that when we think about what's happening, organizations like ours will be all right. We can handle it. But the thing is, voters can't. So what we need to do right now, and I'm sorry I went off on my diatribe and I can't even remember.
No, it's all part of the same conversation.
But I think what's important right now as we think about what's happening, it's not just about educating voters, it's about educating all voters. So for example, we have a website called voteforwoman.org. We did it in Spanish now. We're trying to get the funding, and this is where funders come in, to be able to do it in other languages. It should be in Amharic. It should be in every Asian language. We need to make sure that we're meeting voters exactly where they're at so they know how to make an educated decision not just that some people. We see what they're trying to do, for example, with ballot initiatives. You look at Arkansas, Missouri, Michigan, how they're trying to take voters' ability to make decisions away from them, right? So when we're looking at all of these big issues and we think about what needs to happen, it's not just at one level. It's about making sure that people have the tools and the equipment they need to have agency over their lives and the decisions that they make at the ballot box and the access to get to the ballot box.
Heather, a number of people also demanding corporations do more than just take our money. And what we have seen an increasing number of companies providing resources and services when it comes to voting. And so, talk about, from your perspective, how corporate America has to now appeal to the needs of their consumers when it comes to this issue of voting and protecting democracy.
Thank you.
And I just want to thank Congressman Sewell for this platform today to talk about this, because it is important that companies start to respond to the issues that are happening across the country. And when it comes to voting rights, one of the things that we've done at Lyft in particular is think about the issue and how it relates to transportation. That's what we are. We are a transportation network. And so we are devoted to improving people's lives with transportation. And so when it came to voting in 2016, we saw that over 15 million people did not have access to vote because of transportation. 15 million people across this country. So just think about that. And so we realized that we could do a lot more when it comes to transportation. And that includes partnering with organizations like the NAACP to ensure that we're giving out ride codes during the election, and we're going to do it again this cycle. There will be a discount code that day so people can access their voting places and voting locations.
Now, how does the discount code work for the black folks with flip phones? Y'all know I ain't lying. Everybody don't have an Android or iPhone. Let's be clear.
It's discounted for everyone that wants to access the code.
So y'all got some people with them flip phones. Y'all know. Go ahead.
And so we know that's really important, right? And we also do a lot of education with our employees. So people want to know, what are we doing in communities? What communities are we in? Who are we partnering with? There's a lot of education that goes out across the company to talk about this. And we're also doing this year a no meeting day during election day, right? So we're going to give everyone the flexibility. If you need to run and go vote in the morning, if you need to vote in the evening.
You said no meeting
No
day?
meetings. Now, work still has to get done. But it's a no meeting block.
Got it.
So it's going to give everyone more flexibility so that they can go and vote when they need to.
Congresswoman Sewell, I've spent a lot of time encouraging folks to stop giving to campaigns or parties and give directly to groups like Black Voters Matter, because y'all are in a constant battle even with your own party when it comes to funding black candidates and get out the vote efforts. And I ain't got a problem saying it, and I said it on Tiffany Cross Show, you got largely white consultants who want to keep spending all the money on TV, but there's only so much TV you can buy. And so there has to be strong ground game efforts, because the reality is a door knock several times is going to have more of an impact for somebody who's ignoring a television commercial. So talk about, from your perspective, how y'all have been applying the necessary pressure internally to drive these on-the-ground efforts inside of all these different groups. And let me be clear, not just to the DNC, where Jamie is the chairman, because he doesn't run the Governors Association, the DSCC, DCCC, and all these progressive PACs as well.
Very good question. First, I want to thank you, Roland. You have time and time again been our moderator over the last 12 years that I've been a member of Congress, and I want to say thank you. Give him a round of applause, please.
Y'all know how it works. She called me, look at here. Anytime somebody black call, look at here, they come in with a request.
You're always willing to come and help, and I thank you for that. To our esteemed panelists, listen, I couldn't agree with you more. We have to walk the walk as elected officials. You have to hold us accountable. And I think that goes with our fundraising as well, and the teams that we set up. So I think it's really important to note that when the DCCC did not help Stephen Horsford when he was in trouble, and that Stephen Horsford is now the gala chair, but Stephen Horsford lost in 2016.
He was elected member of Congress. He lost his reelection.
He lost his reelection, and he was what we call a red a red candidate. He was one of those seats that could flip, a swing candidate, and CCC didn't come to help him. And so many of us who are team players, because yes, not only do we have to raise money in order to get elected, in order to move up, in order to help the folks that I represent, I have to also help Nancy Pelosi and the Democratic caucus maintain its majority, okay? And so many of us withheld our money until they started giving money to black people, black candidates. Just because you're in a majority-minority district doesn't mean that it's a majority-minority black district. Doesn't necessarily mean that you will automatically get reelected. So thank you for sounding the alarm when it comes to not only raising money within to get candidates elected, but also what we do with that money, what our caucuses do with that money actually matters. Now, you also have to hold us accountable to make sure our teams are diverse. So it's not enough that we actually have pollsters that are white pollsters when you got black pollsters out there and you got black folks who actually do more than just outreach. Okay? Outreach is important. Outreach is important.
So like when they had the black wide receiver coach, he was the head of recruitment in football.
Yeah.
We can do more than that.
We have to do more than that. And also, I just want you to know that I came on this panel because I wanted to say we need activism on the ground really pressing us on voting rights. Because let me just tell you something. We've passed the John Robert Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act. I'm the lead sponsor of it, not once, but twice. And it passes the House, and it goes and sits over in the Senate and languishes. And so you've got to move these folks out. Look at what happened in Georgia. That special election brought 2 Democratic senators, and guess who got attorney generals now? Guess who's getting federal judges now? Georgia, federally. Okay. It matters. Your vote matters. Your representation matters. And I think that's why it's so important for me to have Evan Milligan in the audience and to recognize him and all that he's doing and the organizations that behind him. Because here's the thing. Alabama is 27% black. And I am the only representative from Alabama out of 7. We deserve, just like we're almost a third, we deserve a third of those seats. We deserve a third of those seats. And only then, with that kind of power, blocks of power, can we move. So people understand that voting is the foundation of all the things that you want for your life. Every time you go to the ballot box and you vote, you're voting for your city council people, your county commissioners, and your federal, and I know I got some federal folks, some state folks out here. I heard the state representative McCampbell's out here. Shout out to you from Alabama. He's my partner. But look, we need to make sure that we are actually voting. It matters every election. Every election. Thank you.
Latasha, y'all did some stuff, and I've been on the ground with y'all so many times. But talk to folks how creative y'all have gotten with the on-the-ground efforts. I'm talking about y'all delivering greens.
Collard green where they are.
I am not talking about arugula, romaine, kale. They were delivering. So just give people understanding, because when we talk about get out the vote efforts on the ground, y'all spend a lot of time figuring out different ways to reach people.
Right. And not just around the vote. It's a part of our building relationship.
Right.
You know, oftentimes folks come to our communities because they want something. Right. And everybody got some reason to tell us what we ought to be doing, but they don't literally stand in the gap when there's a legitimate need. And so for us, there are kind of 4 things that I talk about, the P's. We created the organization. Since our founding, we have literally written checks. We've literally given out $27 million to black grassroots groups on the ground, i.e. we wrote checks. In addition to that, we've layered it, where we've provided other tools and support. And so I always talk about these 4 Ps.
And the checks y'all have written been to other groups where they groups not supporting them.
Well, we're supporting the black. Our goal is to actually help build out the black ecosystem.
Right.
That literally, that it's not just civic engagement groups. It's those groups that are embedded in
and
community.
It's year round.
And that are year round, that is 365 days out of the year. And so we've actually tapped into the cultural capital in our community to build relationships, to get people to work together. That are those 4 Ps that I'll just say briefly. You know, we need policymakers. We need a Congresswoman Sewell who's going to fight for us, right? We also need policy advocates. We need people who are literally, like the panel before us, that are actually going and really fighting to get policy, right? We also know that we need to actually be in a part of this process that we're putting and we're applying pressure. But let's be real clear. There's never been any policy that is passed for black folks in this country that there wasn't a power quotient behind it. Protest, right? Why would we abandon what has worked in the past? It has always been the combination of those 4 things around protest, policy, a power dynamic or a strategy that we've had, and policymakers that collectively, and anytime we think that we don't need one of those, what it does is it undermines, because part of, even in the protests and in the organizing, what you need to build the ecosystem so that black folks can respond, not just on the federal level, right? Because what we also know is that policy can pass, and if there's no power behind it, it may not be enacted. One example of that is Brown versus the Board of Education. It was 1954. Most schools were not desegregated until the early 70s, right? It took a black power frame and organizing that actually put some substance and meat to the bones. And so we have to really recognize that we need all four of those things. So part of the reason why we've invested on the ground is so that on the local level, we can respond. We can not just respond to where we're going to get the vote out, right? We're going to round up the voters, but that we can respond 365 days out of the year to build power.
Derek, how are you driving resources from the national office to your 2,000 branches for on-the-ground efforts? First, to register people. Two, to then get them to the polls, because registering is one thing, but voting is a whole other thing. So Heather talked about transportation. That's one of the issues. We know polling places have been moved. And so what efforts are you doing nationally to drive resources to your state conferences and your local branches to do that on-the-ground activism?
So Congresswoman Sewell set the table, right? The House did their job. It gets to the Senate, and the Senate is not doing their job. Why? Because we have 50-50 split. You can't change the rules around filibuster or blue slip because you have a deadlock, and one of the 50 can go either way at any time. So when you set the table and you look at November, for the NACP, we have done a metrically driven program to identify where can we influence the outcome of an election by moving the needles 5 to 7%. And in some areas, we identify 3%. How can we maximize our resources? Voter registration is necessary, but to move the needle, we have a lot of inactive voters, opportunity voters already on the roll. So we target those individuals. Well, what's the research saying about moving people to the polls? Neighbor-to-neighbor communications. And so we partner with our friends, we give the technology, and we have shown each election cycle since we modeled this project that we're moving the needle of infrequent voters.
When you say give the technology, give the technology, explain what's the technology? That's
we build our own data science team. We have a technology where if you signed up, Heather's a high frequent voter, and she's an opportunity voter. What happens is we say if Heather sign up, we give a list of people in her community at her precincts that she can reach out to and say, hey, I'm Heather Foster, I'm your neighbor, I live in your district, I need you to come out to vote. That social pressure moved people there. So it's a peer-to-peer conversations. And then to your questions, out of that we identify not only our units, but other groups who are operating in that area, and we grant them to turn out to vote. We just did this model in Shelby County, Tennessee. There's a low turnout race for the district attorney, and that district attorney is elected for 8 years. We put the program together. Our local branch president, Van Turner, helped us identify partner groups that branch work with. We send resources to them. They enlisted in this program, and then we put people on the doors, and we paid the people to get on our doors, both our unit members and partner organizations, so we can have outcomes. Outputs are important, but outcomes makes the difference. That's what's sufficient. So we got to move away from what's necessary, because the strategies is laid true. I watched a documentary last night called The Defenders. It's talking about the 3 black lawyers in Mississippi who actually helped spawn the civil rights movement. But R.J. Brown being one of them, he was a teacher who challenged the system, got fired, went to law school, and came back. He understood the necessity of protest. He understood the necessity of legal action. But more importantly, they seen the whole board. And we have to operate by seeing the whole board and push in that direction. Community-centric, not ego-centric. All participatory, and identify how to maximize the resources and not to use the cliches.
Heather, are you also using that data-driven strategy in terms of where you're taking people to the polls to be in impacted areas?
Yeah, so we always work with organizations that allow us to know where are the biggest transportation gaps, right? Where are the deserts? That is what we're trying to do with our program, right? And so we know when we partner with, whether it is League of Women Voters or if we're working with the NAACP, they know specifically here are the gaps.
this is where we need to do the community.
Where are some of those places y'all seen? Just 2 or 3.
I mean, some of those places we've seen, once again, if we're talking about the Selmas, Alabamas, right, the Deep South, we see a lot of gaps there. But also, there was a lot of gaps around transportation because public transportation was gone in 2020. Remember with the pandemic, how many lines were shut down? So we saw it in major cities. You know, sometimes when you think about an entire area of Brooklyn, people always think about maybe it's just Park Slope. That's not the case, right? These are big city areas. And once again, people often don't even know where their polling location is, right? People assume, oh, I'll get it in the mail. That doesn't happen. And so we know through creative ways in the app, we can remind people to vote in the app. When they open it up that day, they'll get the reminder, oh, I'm actually supposed to go and vote, right? And so those are the things that we're looking to do as we expand our program. And we always take feedback from our partners. Trust me, they give it to us. And so we enjoy the creative ways that we can continue to improve transportation options.
Virginia, how have, I remember, again, growing up, seeing the League of Women Voters voter information guides. How has that been transformed with technology where we are now today in 2022? How are you getting that information out to the voters where they understand who's running, what races, and also where they stand on issues?
Well, we're really proud of that. It's an award-winning website, and it just another article came out yesterday that we were the #1 voter information source, the most trusted one. So vote411.org is replaced our by mail voter guides, and you can go there and find everything that you possibly need about every candidate, from municipal and local elections all the way up to federal level.
What's the site again?
Vote411.org.
Got it.
And you can get it in English and in Spanish. You can make your voting plan there. The one thing that a lot of people don't do is make their voting plan. And so making sure that people are prepared. We also have a tool that we use called Outreach Circles, which is a relational organizing tool. So we have kind of like a white label where you can get to Vote 411 through there. But the idea is that every person takes from their contacts. We're not getting the data, so people don't have to worry about people getting on a list, right? You take 10 people from your contacts and say, here, go make your voting plan. And then it's holding them accountable, making sure people have a ride to the polls. Do you have what you need? Making sure you're still registered to vote. The purges are real. Like, the purge is real. And so making sure that you are still able to get on that vote, get your, the ability to vote that day. But then last but not least, I would say outside of technology, nothing beats the power of organizing. Like, I believe in movement building and organizing in ways that, like, it is my heart, my passion. I am an organizer. And we've worked with Black Voters Matter, NAACP, the Lawyers Committee when we were getting arrested, Black Women's Roundtable. I mean, we believe in making as much noise as possible, but that's one piece of it. But that deep power building that goes on between elections, not forgetting that we're only doing the power building when it's time for an election or mobilization, getting out the vote. It's about every day connecting with issues that people are facing on the ground, because that's the best motivator to get people out to the polls.
Here, real quick before I go to Congresswoman.
So the purge is real. Leading up to 2020 election, Shelby, kind of going back to that, they tried to kick out tens of thousands of voters. We partnered with the Lawyers Committee, and we filed a lawsuit to block that. The DA race we ran, that we just won, it was a DA who she refused to look at DA evidence. We got rid of her, a juvenile court justice, and now they can have real justice in that majority black city. So the power of building in this moment has to be metrically driven, very targeted, based on outcomes and not on rhetoric.
And I agree. You know, there was 100,000 voters that we actually filed a lawsuit, because we take our fight 3 ways. We have 3 fights. We fight in the streets, we fight in the courtrooms. We have maybe 6 lawsuits right now, right? And we fight around messaging. So while we're actually building the movement, but we had the same thing that happened. There were 100,000, 200,000 voters were removed off the rolls in Georgia based on a few months right before the election, and under the guise that they had moved. We actually had a sampling. Many of those folks had never moved. And so the responsibility was for them to come back in. Right now, currently, we're in a fight in Cobb County where because of this new law that is passed, that you can actually challenge the validity of a voter. There are 37,000 people in Cobb County, Georgia right now that one person says that they're not a valid voter. And literally, they've got to go through a process to verify that those voters, in fact, are valid voters. That's where we are.
And plus, the other thing that y'all do, which I appreciate, because not all civil rights or voting rights group do this here, y'all also have been very specific in supporting black-owned media with your resources. So when y'all have seen me live streaming their events, that wasn't free. Again, that's why it's also important, because they also have a deep respect for black-owned media, and I appreciate that. Congresswoman, I got to ask you this here. Again, we're 40 days, and I spend a lot of time telling folk, look, you know there's no rule that says you can't fill out a registration card every single year. And I've had viewers say, damn, I never thought about that. I'm like, look, I said, they never get caught. I said, fill it out every year. I said, so they try to screw you. Like, hold up, I got every year I don't fill it out. And what is interesting is when we're constantly hitting folks with that, they're being constantly reminded about that. Where you are in Alabama right now, we talk about that on the ground. You know, what is happening there in terms of identifying folks who have totally checked out and to bring them in, but also specifically the sister who asked that question, how are you targeting younger voters who are in Alabama who want to make change? What is happening there?
Well, first of all, you know, these organizations are our voices on the ground and help to organize us on the ground. And I think that until we can tell young folks, show young folks why the vote matters, why it matters, and the messenger matters who. And it needs to be their fellow, you know, Gen Z, or, you know, you really have to meet people where they are. And you got to be where they live and have a trusted messenger. Mm-hmm. And so, change rarely comes to the halls of Congress. Rarely comes to the halls of Congress. And when change does, it doesn't permeate at the very top. It bubbles up from on the ground. So grassroots activism matters. And you don't have to necessarily be a part of an organization to actually organize. My mom, who passed away last year, used to always say, bloom where you're planted. You don't have to be a member of Congress to make a difference. You can bloom where you're planted and make a difference within the organizations and within the communities that you live and work. Okay? So we have got to know that your vote matters, representation matters. Oh, let me start there. Representation matters. It was only when you got more African Americans seat at the table, the decision-making table, that we started seeing actively money being targeted to our communities. Okay? It was only when you got 6 senators who were women did we actually have a hearing in the armed services, Senate Armed Services, on sexual harassment in the military. It was only when you had one black woman who sat on the on the Select Committee on Intelligence, that was me, that we actually got our national security folks, we held up the money until they addressed the diversity. I mean, the intelligence community and those committees, we have classified briefings. And, oh, by the way, classified budgets. Trillions of dollars of classified budgets. So I'm sitting at that table. I have before me, you know, all of the CIA, the DIA, and not one person looked like me. Not a woman and not someone of color. And so you don't want to necessarily be the only black one sitting there and ask the diversity question, but you better. Because the people who elected you need you to do that. And so, Mr. CIA, we're not going to give you some money until I start seeing some movement. And so that's important. So representation matters, but your voice matters. And in this great country that we have, our voices matter. And the best place to articulate your voice is at the polls. Let's go to the polls and let's go with a vengeance.
Going to have final comments. Let's start with Heather. Final comments. 30 seconds each.
Oh, final comments.
Start with you.
Go. All right. So one of the things I just want to remind everyone that it is important to vote. We are a company that is really partnering across the country this year, and anything that you can continue to do, we will be announcing the code soon. And so telling people to spread the word on the radio around the election, knowing that they can go into their app that day and get that discounted ride is very critical. We're going to continue to partner in cities. Like I said, we are thinking about different ways to roll out our program every election cycle. So we enjoy the feedback. Feel free to give it to me directly. We have some staff here today. But it is something that I would just love everyone to know that we are doing this program again and hope to expand it in the future.
Virginia.
Well, I would say first, thank you for, I mean, you're like a walking encyclopedia. I've never seen anybody have this many facts in their head about everything that's happened over the past 100 years. Like, it's insane.
But Whip is growing up and forced to go to the library, trust me.
But I would say, first of all, please go to vote411.org and make your voting plan. That is probably the most important thing. And then have everybody you know go and make their voting plan, because there are too many changes that are happening around vote by mail. It's not that we've had changes from 2018 to 2020 and now in 2022 on how to vote. And a lot of people are going to be confused. And so it's really important that people know exactly where their voting locations are. If you can vote by mail, do you need to request a ballot? Do you need to have an ID?
Mhm.
All of those things really matter. So helping, especially older folks who maybe don't have the access to technology or even the ability to navigate it the same way, making sure that you're sitting down and supporting them. And then I would say also, you know, if we're not your grandmother's League of Women Voters anymore, we have 760 leagues. I would encourage you to please, if you can and you want to be politically active in an organization like ours, we welcome you.
Derek?
2 main points. We've done a series of surveys, focus group with Hit Strategy over the past year, and we have tracking polls. We share that with our partners. Black voters want to see that their vote is leading to the change. They don't want to say that the White House made the change or this member of Congress. They want to see that my vote resulted in this change. Secondly, what's driving the energy of black voters is the realization that racism, white supremacy, and discrimination is on the table, and that we must protect democracy because that's about protection of community. That the economy is driving the energy of black voters. Getting the administration to finally to do something on loan debt, we're beginning to see movements in the right direction. That's really important. Thirdly, the criminal justice system. It's been inequitable, it's always been inequitable, and it still is. That's pushing them. And then the other two is affordable housing and crime within our community, gun violence. So that's what's driving voters. And then on the other side of that, we have never had a one strategy solution or one organization solution. It has always taken all of us shooting at this from all the angles as possible, but we must do so with the outcome in mind and not the outputs. Because if we only deal with the outputs, we're playing with the people. We need to test stuff, take risks, and if we're not driving an outcome for November to protect the House and increase by 2 members in the Senate so we can do away with these archaic rules and pass John Lewis Reauthorization Act and pass all the things that we need to do, we're only playing with the people. And we got to take risks. It is not a competition. We're talking about our community health, our community life.
Right.
We can do it, but we must do it together.
Derek been around too many black preachers. He said he had 2 points. That was 7 points. Congresswoman, 30 seconds.
Listen, I'm going to give you a reason to go to the polls and vote. The last administration had one seminal piece of legislation that they passed, and it was a tax bill that gave more money to the top 80% of the money that was given to the top 1% of the population. It helped rich people. This administration's only been in office for 2 years, and I want you to know that we've been busy. We passed the American Rescue Plan. The American Rescue Plan put money in your pocket. It gave shots in arms. It helped our state legislatures. It was important. Then we passed the bipartisan infrastructure bill, broadband, water, sewer. Then we gave student loans, debt forgiveness, okay? Then we got CHIPS, which was manufacturing. Let me just say, all of these bills that passed and were signed into law help everyday Americans, help working families, helps the middle class, helps those who strive to be in the middle class.
So your vote makes a difference. So tell that to everyone who's thinking about, I don't know if I'm going to stay at home, because turnout matters. Okay? So I want to thank our panel. I want to thank you, Roland, our moderator. But most importantly, I want to thank all of you in the audience, because you are the ones who will make the voter plans. You will help to bring people to the polls and to turn out. And so when they tell you, why should I go to the polls and vote? Because your vote matters. It does make a difference. And if you can't see a qualitative difference in your life from the previous administration to this administration, come see me in the back of the room and I'll tell you a whole litany of other things. Okay?
I don't think she's going to tell you in the back of the room. Somebody black said, meet me in the back of the room.
And I know
some furniture moving. All right, Latasha, come on up here. You're going to take us home like I expect you to take us home. Come on. Come on.
My sister from Selma.
Come on. That's why.
Well, the first
that's
thing
why she
I
looked at me.
right
I'm like, she ain't last.
Was the day I started to fight. Keep your eyes on the prize and hold on, hold on, hold on, hold on. Keep your eyes on the prize and hold on, hold on. Our fight has not always just been rooted in strategy, y'all. It has been in the spirit of movement, and we have always been a people who have been resilient, and we have resisted. And so in this moment, this is our moment to stand up, not just for where we are, but we got to know what time it is. This is the moment that all hands on deck. And as you said, that voters matter, we do. But what we know in particular is that black voters matter.
Put your hands together for Latasha Brown, Heather Foster, Virginia Solomon, Derek Johnson, Congresswoman Terry Sewell. Folks, thank you very much for being a part of this Braintrust. I'll see y'all next at the one next. Am I going next door? With Transportation Secretary Pete Buttigieg talking about the billions going to transportation and how we as black folks get some of that money.
All right.
Thank you so very much.
Thank you all. Thank you. And can a panelist from the first come up and we can take a group photo? You know, I'm also the chair of the Congressional Foundation, and I just want to say we do more than just put on this annual legislative conference. We do so because we want to have the next generation of leaders. The mission of the Congressional Black Caucus Foundation is to build leaders, to develop leaders, to inform our public, to inform public policy, but most importantly, to develop leaders. Black excellence. And that's where your money goes towards. And that is what this convention is about, okay? So thank you all for coming to the Braintrust, and we look forward to continued support. Thanks.